June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea, Western Pacific. 30 hours. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, 58, commander of the Japanese mobile fleet, observed through binoculars as American carrier aircraft filled the sky, wave after wave. More planes than his intelligence estimates predicted. More coordination than Japanese doctrine considered possible. Ozawa commanded 9 carriers carrying 430 aircraft, the largest Japanese carrier force assembled since Midway 2 years earlier. His mission was to destroy American carriers threatening the Marianas. His confidence was high. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized decisive carrier battles. This was the moment for which the Imperial Navy had trained. But what Ozawa saw that morning shattered assumptions about carrier warfare. The Americans weren't operating individual carriers coordinating loosely. They'd created something unprecedented. Task Force 58. 15 carriers operating as a single integrated striking force. Over 900 aircraft under centralized command. Logistics support allowing sustained operations far from base. What happened over the next 2 days would convince Japanese naval commanders that carrier warfare had evolved beyond their capability to match. Not because individual ships or pilots were inadequate. Because American organization created capability, Japan couldn't replicate regardless of courage or skill. By June 1944, carrier warfare doctrine had evolved dramatically since Pearl Harbor. The Imperial Japanese Navy entered the war with the world's most experienced carrier force. The Kido Butai, 6 fleet carriers operating together, struck Pearl Harbor with precision and overwhelming force. Japanese naval aviators were the best trained in the world. Japanese carrier doctrine emphasized aggressive offensive strikes, delivering maximum aircraft in single devastating attacks. This doctrine achieved remarkable success in early war. Pearl Harbor, Ceylon, Darwin, Japanese carriers dominated wherever they operated. But the doctrine assumed relatively short-duration operations close to friendly bases. Carriers would strike, withdraw, replenish at base, strike again. The concept of sustained carrier operations far from support didn't exist in Japanese planning. American carrier doctrine evolved differently through necessity and industrial capacity. Early war American carriers operated individually or in small groups due to limited numbers. But as Essex-class fleet carriers and Independence-class light carriers entered service from mid-1943 onward, the Navy developed new organizational concepts to exploit growing carrier numbers. The Fast Carrier Task Force emerged in late 1943 as operational concept. Rather than individual carriers operating independently, multiple carriers formed task groups. Multiple task groups formed task forces. Task Force 58, under Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, represented this concept's fullest expression by June 1944. 15 carriers organized into 4 task groups, each containing 3 to 4 carriers plus escorts. Total aircraft exceeded 900. The force operated as integrated unit under centralized command. The organizational advantages were enormous. Air operations could be coordinated across all carriers simultaneously. Fighter protection covered the entire task force, not just individual carriers. Strikes combined aircraft from multiple carriers, overwhelming enemy defenses with numbers no single carrier could generate. Logistics support ships traveled with the task force, allowing underway replenishment of fuel, ammunition, and supplies without returning to base. Most critically, the task force could sustain operations indefinitely as long as logistics ships maintained supply. This eliminated the Japanese assumption that carrier forces must withdraw periodically to base. American carriers operated continuously for months, striking targets across thousands of miles while remaining supplied and combat-ready. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated this organizational superiority devastatingly. Ozawa's mobile fleet approached the Marianas with 9 carriers, including the new fleet carriers Taiho and Shokaku. Intelligence suggested American carriers numbered 7 to 9. Ozawa planned to use land-based aircraft from Guam and surrounding islands to supplement his carrier aircraft, achieving local numerical superiority despite American advantage in total forces. But American intelligence, aided by code-breaking, gave Mitchell complete picture of Japanese intentions. Task Force 58 had positioned specifically to intercept the mobile fleet. When Japanese aircraft launched their strikes on the morning of June 19th, they encountered defensive preparations unlike anything seen before. Mitchell's staff coordinated fighter defense across all 4 task groups simultaneously. Radar detected incoming Japanese strikes at extreme range. Fighter direction officers vectored defending Hellcats to intercept positions calculated to meet Japanese aircraft before they reached the task force. As Japanese strikes approached from multiple vectors, American fighters engaged them in coordinated layers. When Japanese aircraft penetrated the first fighter layer, another layer engaged them, then another. The result was the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Of 373 Japanese carrier aircraft launched that day, 243 were shot down before reaching American carriers. The remaining 130 that reached attack positions faced intense anti-aircraft fire from coordinated fleet defense. Few got through. 3 American ships were damaged. No carriers were hit. Simultaneously, American submarines detected and attacked Japanese carriers. Taiho and Shokaku, the newest and among the most capable Japanese carriers, were both torpedoed and sank within hours. Internal damage control failures compounded torpedo damage, demonstrating vulnerability. Japanese carriers couldn't overcome despite modern design. On June 20th, Mitchell launched a long-range strike against the retreating Japanese fleet. The strike flew 300 miles beyond normal carrier aircraft range, arriving over Japanese carriers at dusk. American aircraft sank carrier Hio and damaged several other ships. Many American aircraft ran out of fuel, returning in darkness. Mitchell turned on carrier deck lights despite submarine threat, guiding returning aircraft home. Some aircraft crashed attempting night landings. Rescue operations recovered most downed aircrews. The willingness to risk carriers to recover pilots demonstrated American confidence in their operational superiority. The 2-day battle cost Japan 3 fleet carriers, approximately 600 aircraft, and irreplaceable experienced pilots. American losses were 123 aircraft, mostly operational losses, with majority of aircrew recovered. No carriers were lost. Japanese after-action reports from Philippine Sea expressed shock at American coordination and defensive capability. Captain Toshikazu Omai, operations officer for the mobile fleet, wrote in his report dated June 25, 1944, recovered from Japanese archives after the war. American carrier defense exceeded all previous experience or intelligence estimates. Their radar detection range allowed fighter interception far from the task force. Their fighter direction was coordinated across entire force rather than individual carriers. When our aircraft approached from multiple directions simultaneously, Americans engaged all approaches with sufficient fighters. This level of coordination requires communications and command organization we lack. Individual American carriers may not exceed our carriers in quality, but their task force organization creates capability we cannot match with current doctrine and communications equipment. The report recommended immediate development of similar task force organization and fighter direction capabilities. But Japan lacked the resources, time, and industrial capacity to implement such changes. American organizational advantage derived from systematic development over years, supported by industrial capacity producing carriers, aircraft, radar systems, and communications equipment in quantities Japan couldn't approach. The logistics disparity was equally decisive. Task Force 58 operated continuously from February through June 1944, over 4 months, while remaining supplied through underway replenishment. Fleet oilers delivered fuel, ammunition ships delivered ordnance, supply ships delivered food, spare parts, replacement aircraft. This sustained operation, far from Pearl Harbor or any major base, demonstrated logistics capability that redefined naval operations. Japanese carriers required return to base for major replenishment. The mobile fleet sortied from its base in the Philippines specifically for the Philippine Sea operation, planning to return immediately after the battle regardless of outcome. Sustained operations were impossible without base support. This limitation prevented Japanese carriers from maintaining presence in any area, reducing their strategic value. The pilot training disparity compounded organizational disadvantages. By mid-1944, American pilot training programs produced approximately 800 new carrier pilots monthly. These pilots completed 600 hours flight training, including 200 hours in their combat aircraft type, before joining fleet squadrons. Replacement pilots arrived continuously, maintaining squadron strength despite combat losses. Japanese pilot training had collapsed by 1944. Fuel shortages, instructor losses, and compressed curricula reduced training to 200 hours or less. New pilots arrived at carriers with minimal experience and were lost quickly in combat against better-trained Americans. The Philippine Sea Turkey Shoot resulted partly from inexperienced Japanese pilots facing veteran American pilots in coordinated defensive environment. After Philippine Sea, Japanese carrier capability was effectively destroyed. Remaining carriers had aircraft and pilots, but couldn't oppose American task forces. At Leyte Gulf, 4 months later, Japanese carriers served as decoys, drawing American carriers away from invasion beaches while Japanese battleships attacked landing forces. This use of carriers as bait rather than strike forces demonstrated how thoroughly carrier warfare had shifted. The human cost was staggering but less recognized in Western histories. Over 3,000 Japanese naval aviators were lost at Philippine Sea and in surrounding operations. These weren't just pilots but aircrew, mechanics, and support personnel. Each loss removed experience and expertise that couldn't be replaced. Families in Japan received formal notifications. Many communities lost multiple young men in a single day. The cultural impact of these losses shaped post-war Japan's relationship with military aviation and naval power. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, a fighter pilot who survived Philippine Sea, was interviewed in 1985 for NHK television documentary about the battle. His testimony captured the pilot perspective. "We launched expecting to find 7 or 8 American carriers we could overwhelm with numbers and experience. Instead, we found 15 carriers protected by hundreds of fighters directed by radar we couldn't detect or jam. Our formations were intercepted before we saw American ships. Fighters attacked us from above, from the sides, in coordinated patterns that broke our formations apart. Those of us who reached the task force faced anti-aircraft fire more intense than anything we'd experienced. I saw friends' aircraft explode around me. I somehow survived to return. Of my squadron's 18 aircraft, 5 returned. None successfully attacked American carriers. We understood that day we faced enemy with organization and resources we couldn't overcome through courage alone." The organizational lessons from fast carrier task forces influenced naval doctrine permanently. Every modern navy operates carrier strike groups using principles developed by Task Force 58. Centralized command, coordinated air operations, layered defense, sustained operations through underway replenishment. The terminology changed, but concepts remained. At the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, midshipmen study Philippine Sea as foundational example of naval organizational superiority. The battle appears in curriculum not primarily for tactical lessons, but for strategic lessons about organization, logistics, and industrial capacity, determining naval power more than ship or weapon quality. A teaching principle at the Academy states, "Naval power in modern era depends on sustained operations capability. The side that can maintain presence, conduct continuous operations, and replace losses determines outcomes more than any single engagement." Fast carrier task forces demonstrated this principle definitively. Japan won tactical victories early war through superior training and doctrine. America won strategically through superior organization and logistics, enabling sustained operations Japan couldn't match. Today, at the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C., archived documents from Philippine Sea include Japanese reports analyzing American task force operations. These reports make clear Japanese officers understood American organizational advantages. One report, dated July 1944, from the Combined Fleet Staff to Naval General Staff, Stated bluntly, matching American task force capabilities requires carrier numbers, aircraft production, pilot training capacity, and logistics support we lack. Our current force structure cannot oppose their carrier operations effectively. Recommend strategic reorientation toward objectives, achievable with available forces. This report influenced Japanese strategy shift toward kamikaze operations later in 1944. If conventional carrier operations couldn't succeed against American task forces, Japanese leadership concluded, then alternative methods must be employed. The kamikaze concept emerged partly from recognition that organizational disadvantages made conventional carrier warfare unwinnable. The broader lesson extends beyond naval warfare. Organizations competing against opponents with superior coordination, logistics, and resource advantages face choices. Match the opponent's organizational capabilities, which requires time, resources, and often cultural change. Find alternative approaches exploiting different advantages, or accept that competition under current conditions is unwinnable. Japan chose alternative approaches, but lacked time to develop them effectively. By the time Japanese strategic leadership recognized organizational disadvantages couldn't be overcome through tactical excellence, the war's outcome was determined. The Fast Carrier Task Force didn't just defeat Japanese carriers. It rendered Japanese naval strategy obsolete. A museum exhibit at the Pacific War Museum in Fredericksburg, Texas, displays photographs of Task Force 58 alongside photographs of the Kido Butai from 1941. The visual contrast is striking. The Kido Butai shows 6 carriers in neat formation, an aesthetically pleasing display of naval power. Task Force 58 shows 15 carriers spread across miles of ocean, task groups in different formations, appearing less organized but far more powerful. The placard reads, "Beauty versus function." The Kido Butai was beautiful. Task Force 58 was functional. In war, functional beats beautiful. A visitor comment in the museum guestbook from 2016, written by a retired naval officer who'd served in carrier operations, reflected modern understanding. "I served on carriers in the 1980s. Our strike group operations descended directly from Task Force 58 concepts. Centralized command, distributed forces, coordinated strikes, sustained operations. The technology changed. The principles didn't. Japanese at Philippine Sea faced organization they couldn't match. That's the ultimate advantage in sustained competition. Not better weapons, better organization." In 1944, Japan had capable carriers, brave pilots, and determined leadership. But individual excellence couldn't overcome organizational disadvantage when resources and capabilities were unequal. Fast carrier task forces weren't revolutionary in any single element. Carriers, aircraft, radar, communications, all existed before. The revolution was organization, taking existing elements and organizing them into something more capable than sum of parts. That's the lesson. Technology matters. Training matters. But organization matters most when competition is sustained. The side that organizes better, coordinates better, sustains operations better, usually wins regardless of individual element quality. Task Force 58 proved this. Japanese carriers were good. American organization was better. Organization won.